I was 29, finally settled in my cozy Denver apartment when the group chat flashed. Then came the video call. Mom and Aunt Carol, all too bright, proposing a solution. They wanted to ship my 19-year-old cousin Emma off to Victoria Hale, the same relative they said turned me from stubborn to successful. They called it a golden opportunity. The sound of their false cheer hit a wound so deep, I cut them off. I told them, "If you send her, I will tell everyone what really happened. I am Margaret Fowler." Tonight, the quiet hum of my life in Denver, Colorado, felt like a deliberate, fragile shield. It was late, the kind of deep winter evening where the snow outside turns the streetlights into hazy, watercolor moons. My apartment, a snug rental in the Highland neighborhood, was warm with the scent of pine and leftover Thai food. I was curled up on my thrifted velvet sofa, running analytics for a piece of content I'd scheduled for my marketing job at Harborline Storyworks, a small content strategy firm downtown. My professional title is Content Strategist, a tidy, grown-up label that screams competence and independence, exactly what my family wants to see. My phone, resting beside my laptop, suddenly vibrated with a rapid series of notifications. The unmistakable drumming of the Fowler family group chat. It was always a high-energy, low-substance deluge of baby photos and thinly veiled social climbing. I usually muted it, but tonight, curiosity or maybe just fatigue made me tap it open. Aunt Carol. "Did everyone hear the news? Big changes coming for Emma." Cousin Denise. "Oh, thank goodness. She needs it." Mom, Eleanor. "Just finishing up the call with Victoria. So positive." Eleanor added a string of enthusiastic emojis. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach, the kind of instinctive alarm bell that rings whenever the word Victoria surfaces in a family conversation. Victoria Hale. Before I could even type a non-committal "what's up?", my phone screen shifted. Incoming video call. Mom and Aunt Carol. I took a deep breath, slicked my hand over my ponytail, and answered. The faces of my mother, Eleanor, and my Aunt Carol filled the screen, framed by the warm glow of their separate, well-appointed living rooms back in Ohio. They were beaming, almost vibrating with affected excitement. "Mags, there you are, sweetheart," Mom chirped, her voice 2 octaves too high. Aunt Carol leaned in conspiratorially. "We have such good news, but you have to promise to be supportive." I managed a tight smile. "I'm always supportive. What's going on?" And then they laid out the plan, a script they'd clearly rehearsed. "It's Emma," Mom started, sighing dramatically. "She's just lost. 19, dropped out of community college, says she wants to be a digital nomad, whatever that is. She's being totally defiant. Mags, so lazy." Aunt Carol jumped in, her voice dripping with judgment. "She needs structure. Margaret, discipline. She needs to understand the meaning of a real work ethic." The words, lost, defiant, lazy, were tossed around with casual cruelty. But I was braced for the reveal. They announced they were sending Emma to Santa Fe, New Mexico, to live with Victoria Hale. "It's the most wonderful thing," Mom gushed, her face softening into a beatific expression. "Victoria offered to take her in, just like she did for you. Mags, we think she needs a few years in a disciplined environment to mature." Aunt Carol nodded vigorously. "Victoria is the one who made Margaret the successful woman she is today. It's a golden opportunity. Mags, just like it was for you." My blood turned to ice water. The screen, alive with their smiling, hopeful faces, felt miles away. A golden opportunity. The phrase echoed the thousands of times they'd used it 9 years ago. They continued their praise of Victoria, painting a portrait of a self-made woman that was part myth, part social ledger entry. Victoria Hale, owner of Solace Haven Retreats, a high-end chain of wellness centers, wealthy, impeccable, disciplined. "She's strict, we know," Mom said, lowering her voice slightly. "But only because she cares. She takes you under her wing. Mags, teaches you how to be independent, how to win. As they talked, the audio crackling with their shared enthusiasm, the occasional sound of Aunt Carol's husband laughing in the background, I wasn't listening to their words anymore. I was listening to the past. The background noise of their video call, the clinking of ice, the bright sound of their celebratory clatter, transformed into other noises in my memory. The quiet, authoritative thud of a heavy door closing, the sound of forks scraping on expensive porcelain in a dining room I was not allowed to enter, the low, pleased laughter of Victoria's high-profile guests, and me, always me, standing silently behind the kitchen island, invisible in a nameless, plain apron, waiting for my next instruction. The image was so vivid, I actually flinched. "Margaret, are you there?" Mom asked, noticing my sudden stillness. "You look a little pale." I blinked, forcing myself back to my Denver living room. "I'm here, Mom." "Good. Now, we just need you to talk to Emma. You're the success story. Tell her how much Victoria helped you. Tell her what a privilege this is." The word privilege, it hit me like a blow. They were handing my cousin a map to the same cage they'd helped push me into. Mom repeated the family's mantra, the phrase that had been both a gift and a curse for nearly a decade. "If it weren't for Victoria Hale, you wouldn't be where you are today. Mags, you wouldn't have your apartment, your job, your life." The sentence was a knife twisting in the deepest wound I had spent years trying to scab over. It was the absolute, total erasure of my own struggle, my own hard work, my escape, all attributed to the very person who had nearly broken me. They saw my success as Victoria's trophy. They didn't see the scars. I couldn't let them do this to Emma. The words left my mouth before I could process the gravity, raw and unpolished. "You can't send her there." The smiles vanished. The background laughter went silent. "Excuse me?" Aunt Carol asked, her tone instantly hostile. "I said you can't send Emma to live with Victoria. Not for discipline, not for a golden opportunity, not for anything." I spoke slowly, deliberately. "If you put her on that plane, I will tell everyone. I will tell the entire family what really went on there, every day, every detail." Mom's face crumpled into a mask of pure annoyance. "Margaret, don't be dramatic. What are you even talking about? Victoria is family." "I'm talking about exploitation. Mom, I'm talking about being turned into an unpaid servant under the guise of being family. I'm talking about the 16-hour days and the emotional abuse and the threats." The words, finally spoken aloud, tasted like bitter ash. Aunt Carol scoffed, pulling back from the screen. "Oh, here we go. You're so overly sensitive. Margaret, you've always magnified things. Victoria gave you a roof over your head and taught you how to answer a phone like a professional. You were 20 years old. Mags. Most kids your age were still drinking beer in their dorms." "She's right. Mags," Mom insisted, the volume of her voice rising in defensive hysteria. "You are distorting the past. Victoria gave you a chance. You're just being ungrateful and trying to stir up trouble." They dismissed me instantly. Too sensitive, dramatic, magnifying things. And in that moment of absolute, total invalidation, I stopped arguing with them. I stopped fighting for their understanding. They were so committed to the narrative of Victoria the Savior that they could not see the truth of Victoria the abuser. The truth was, they needed Victoria to be the hero, because if she wasn't, then they were complicit in sending their child into harm's way. Their denial was the final piece of the puzzle. It confirmed that I couldn't trust them to protect Emma, and I couldn't rely on them to ever acknowledge my pain. My resolve hardened, cold and sharp. "Fine," I said, my voice steady now, stripped of all emotion. "You want to call it magnifying things? You want to call it drama? You will have the whole story." I disconnected the call before they could reply, plunging my apartment back into silence. My heart was pounding not from fear, but from the terrifying liberation of a decision made. It was time to tell the truth, all of it, not just for Emma, but for the 20-year-old version of myself, who had been silenced for so long. It started the day I was sent to live with Victoria Hale. It started 9 years ago. 9 years ago. I was exactly who my family described Emma as being. Adrift, though not through defiance. I was 20. And my reality was less about digital nomad dreams and more about the crushing weight of bills. I'd walked away from Ohio State after just 2 semesters, not because I didn't love the material. I loved history and literature, but because the math wasn't working. The tuition was a slow, agonizing hemorrhage, and every dollar spent felt like it was siphoning oxygen from my parents. Back then, I lived in a perpetually damp little duplex in Cleveland, Ohio, to keep the wolf from the door. I was working 2 part-time jobs, cashier at a huge hardware store during the day, and shifts waiting tables at a family-style Italian place most evenings. My shoulders were constantly tight from stress and exhaustion. The Fowler family had been hit hard. My dad, bless his heart, was the kind of man who'd worked for the same manufacturing company for 25 years, only to be deemed redundant after a massive round of restructuring. He went from being the breadwinner to a shadow of himself, spending his days filling out applications that went nowhere. My mom, Eleanor, worked double shifts as a supermarket cashier, her uniform always smelling faintly of cleaning products and freezer aisle cold. We were constantly playing catch-up, and the pressure was amplified by the constant, silent comparison to my mother's side of the family. The extended family, the Hales, were successful, wealthy, and lived in the kind of sun-drenched homes you saw in magazines. My mom carried a deep, lifelong chip on her shoulder about feeling lesser, and that insecurity bled into every decision she made for us. And I, Margaret, had always been the compliant child, the good kid. Since I was a little girl, my value in the family system was tied to my sacrifice. I was the free babysitter for my cousins, the one who stayed late after every family gathering to clear plates and stack chairs. I was constantly praised for my maturity and selflessness. No one ever asked if I was tired. No one ever asked if I wanted to do it. The answer was always assumed. I should want to help. I was the good daughter, and good daughters make sacrifices for the family. That's how Victoria Hale first entered my orbit. She was Mom's wealthy older cousin, a woman who lived a glamorous, distant life out in Santa Fe, New Mexico. She was the family's greatest narrative, the self-made success story. Mom spoke of Victoria like a character from a fairy tale. Victoria had supposedly started with nothing, but now owned a chain of high-end wellness centers called Solace Haven Retreats. She had a huge Spanish-style villa, drove luxury cars, and counted well-known artists and CEOs among her clientele. "She's proof. Mags," Mom would say. Her eyes glazed over with a mixture of envy and aspiration. Proof that if you're driven and you work hard, you can rise above all of this. She constantly reminded me, Victoria always gives a leg up to anyone in the family who is willing to work hard and learn. Then came the conversation, the one that changed everything. It was a cold Tuesday evening. My dad was staring blankly at the local news, and Mom was sitting opposite me at our small kitchen table, a bank statement spread out between us. "Mags, we have a golden proposal for you," Mom announced, her voice soft but insistent. She and Dad had been talking to Victoria. Victoria had agreed to take me in. The arrangement was simple. I would move to Santa Fe and live in Victoria's villa, getting free room and board. In exchange, I would work for her as a personal assistant, learning the ropes of her luxury business. They called it an apprenticeship. "She's offering to mentor you," Dad said, finally looking up, his eyes holding a desperation I couldn't ignore. "We don't have to pay for your housing. You can send home whatever stipend she gives you, and we can finally start chipping away at this debt." The idea of leaving Cleveland, of escaping the constant financial pressure, was intoxicating, but the reality of dropping my life and moving across the country for a woman I'd met twice was terrifying. "But what about my jobs? My classes? I was going to restart classes in the spring," I stammered. Mom waved her hand dismissively. "This is better than a community college degree. Margaret, this is real-world experience with a successful person. You'll be living in a mansion. She'll be your mentor." They pressed me. The sheer weight of their financial anxiety was heavy in the air. I looked at the dark circles under Mom's eyes, at the defeated slump in Dad's shoulders. They weren't asking me to go. They were begging me to be their lifeline. Then came the clincher, the promise that sealed the deal. Just 1 year. Mags, a year of hard work, learning her system. And after that year, Victoria promised she would use her connections to introduce you to someone big. She'll get you into a major corporation. A year, a sacrifice, a clear, achievable exit ramp to a stable future, not just for me, but for them. I felt the familiar weight of being the good daughter, the one who was supposed to solve the family's problems. I nodded. Okay, Mom, I'll go. The relief on their faces was immediate and profound. They hugged me tight, their praises flooding me. I was smart. I was selfless. I was finally getting the break I deserved. We had a small farewell dinner with a few close relatives. Everyone toasted me, raising cheap wine glasses and declaring that my life was about to change. Margaret's trading that dumpy apartment for a New Mexico paradise, my uncle joked. She's going to be working with the elite. No one, absolutely no one, noticed the brief flicker of fear in my eyes. The only person who saw anything was Mom, who pulled me aside as I was packing the last things into my tiny suitcase. She grasped my hand, her eyes serious. Don't mess this up. Margaret, don't complain. Don't let us look bad in front of Victoria. This is our chance. Don't let us look bad. That was the real mission. My well-being was secondary to the family's social standing in Victoria's eyes. A few days later, I was on a night coach bus, watching the familiar lights of Cleveland shrink in the distance. I clutched my small, worn suitcase, the one containing my entire life. I was 20 years old, utterly exhausted, and convinced that I was finally stepping through the door to opportunity. The idea of living in luxury, learning a business, and finally providing for my parents gave me a rush of adrenaline that masked the sheer terror of the unknown. I truly believed I was heading toward success. I had no idea I was walking down a path that would lead to a slow, methodical process of being beaten down, not with a fist, but with the cold, calculated leverage of gratitude and debt. I was about to become Victoria Hale's perfect, disposable asset. The bus pulled into Santa Fe just after sunrise. The air was dry and crisp, a shocking contrast to the humidity of Ohio. Victoria's villa, set on a sprawling plot in the quiet, dusty outskirts, felt like a mirage. It was a massive, elegant white stucco house, its terracotta roof blending with the adobe landscape. The property was framed by meticulously maintained gardens filled with sculptural cacti and native plants. In the back, I glimpsed a shimmering, cobalt blue swimming pool and a separate, modern glass structure, the private, at-home spa area for Victoria's personal use and VIP clients. The interior was everything my cramped Cleveland duplex was not. Vast, echoing, and immaculate. The floors were polished dark wood, the furniture was sleek and minimalist, and everything looked like it had been lifted straight out of an Architectural Digest feature. It smelled of expensive cedar and something bright and citrusy, a scent I instantly associated with the Solace Haven brand of luxury. Victoria Hale met me at the door. Her appearance was, as always, utterly perfect. She wore a tailored shift dress. Her dark hair was swept up in a flawless, severe bun, and her perfume, something rich and complex, preceded her by a few seconds. She had the kind of powerful, radiating polish that made me, in my wrinkled bus clothes and cheap trainers, feel instantly small and unformed. "Margaret, darling, you made it," she exclaimed, her voice ringing with the right note of maternal warmth. Two women in crisp black uniforms, her in-house staff, I guessed, stood a respectful distance behind her. Victoria pulled me into a brief, tight hug, careful not to muss her own clothes. "This is my niece, Margaret," Victoria announced to the staff, her hand resting on my shoulder. "She's come all the way from Ohio to start her apprenticeship with me, a true workhorse, just like her aunt. She's going to be learning the Solace Haven standard." The staff smiled politely, offering muted hellos. I tried to smile back, feeling exposed and confused by the sudden performance of affection. Victoria made me feel like an object she was displaying, a token of her generosity. As soon as the staff had quietly retreated to their duties, the mask dropped. The temperature in the air seemed to plummet. Victoria ushered me past the grand living room and directly into the large, professional-grade kitchen. She didn't offer me a drink or ask about my trip. Instead, she slid a thick, laminated schedule across the marble countertop. "Right, enough sentimentality. We have a business to run." Her voice was flat, cold, and entirely devoid of the warmth she'd shown seconds earlier. "Your schedule begins today, but we'll start soft for your first week. I need you to be fully operational by next Monday." I scanned the schedule. It was relentless. 5 a.m. Wake up. Prepare my special herbal breakfast blend. 5:30 a.m. to 7 a.m. Clean and sterilize the at-home spa area, the infrared sauna, the cold plunge pool, the massage room. 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. Manage all immediate personal and professional emails. Triage anything urgent for the Solace Haven head office. 10 a.m. to noon. Errands and supply runs, groceries, dry cleaning, picking up specialized equipment. Noon to 7 p.m. Personal assistance during the day. This included everything from taking calls and coordinating my meetings to driving VIP clients to and from the airport or local attractions. 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. Dinner preparation, serving, and comprehensive cleanup. 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. Laundry, ironing, and preparing any necessary documents for the next day. The list was exhaustive, stretching from before dawn until well past the end of a normal workday. It was a double-shift schedule, 7 days a week, and it included every possible chore, disguised under the vague heading of personal assistant duties. Victoria leaned against the counter, observing me with a chilling detachment. "When we are alone, Margaret, you are either my assistant or simply the girl. I am not your aunt, and you are not my niece in this house. This is a professional arrangement that benefits you greatly." She hammered home the core condition of my stay, the invisible chains she used to bind me. "You are here because you owe me. You owe me for the room, for the utilities, for the food, and for the priceless opportunity to learn from me. Your family owes me for taking you off their hands. Do you understand?" I murmured. "Yes, Victoria." She didn't call me Margaret. She didn't call me Mags. I was a resource, a utility. The food situation was the first truly humiliating reality check. I'd grown up dreaming of the lavish meals Victoria served at her parties. Now, I saw them up close, but I was never a participant. My meals were completely segregated. I had to wait until Victoria and any visiting guests had finished their 3-course dinners. Then, I would clear the table, wash every dish, and sterilize the kitchen. Only then was I permitted to eat whatever cold. Leftover scraps remained in the back of the stove or the fridge. Often, I ate standing up, already half dead with exhaustion, shoveling cold pasta or dry chicken into my mouth, listening to the silence of the now spotless house. It was a physical and psychological way of marking my lower status, a constant reminder that I was not family. I was staff. After showing me the tiny, windowless room in the back wing of the house, a room clearly meant for storage, not sleeping, Victoria presented me with a stack of papers. "Internal procedure," she said briskly, flipping pages. "Since you are receiving accommodation and mentorship, we need to formalize the support. Sign here and here. This is just to legally formalize the arrangement so we can account for your presence." She offered no explanation, no time to read the dense legalese. Under the bright lights of the kitchen, feeling the intense pressure of her gaze, I signed. I trusted my family. I trusted the promise of opportunity. What I didn't know was that I had just signed a document accepting an extremely low apprentice stipend, a paltry sum that was barely enough to cover the minimal expenses I sent home, and nowhere near minimum wage for the work I was doing. Crucially, the document explicitly labeled me as a trainee receiving allowances rather than a proper employee with rights, benefits, or protection under labor laws. It was a perfect piece of legal maneuvering designed to exploit the very concept of a family favor. In those first few weeks, I clung desperately to the narrative my mother had drilled into me. This is necessary discipline. This is how successful people live. This is temporary hardship before triumph. I tried to believe that the 16-hour days and the rigid silence were just the solace haven standard of excellence. I told myself I was learning valuable lessons in service and high-end management. But as the fatigue built, and as Victoria's demands grew more arbitrary and less about learning, the truth began to pierce through the gilded veneer. I was not a cherished niece being mentored. I was not a lucky apprentice receiving a golden opportunity. I was cheap labor. I was Victoria Hale's perfect, live-in worker, loyal because of family ties, silent because of financial debt, and utterly disposable. My entire existence in that polished, beautiful villa was a lie, a form of resource extraction disguised by the single, dangerous word, family. The description I used that night on the video call, the one that made my mother and aunt recoil, was that Victoria beat me daily. It's important to clarify what that meant. Victoria Hale never laid a finger on me. There were no bruises, no broken bones, no physical evidence that could be shown to a jury. Her violence was far more insidious, administered not with a fist, but with the calculated erosion of my self-worth and the relentless, crushing weight of my 16-hour work schedule. I was beaten down every single day through psychological torture and debilitating exhaustion. The work alone was punishment. My day started before 5 o'clock, and I rarely shut down before 11 o'clock at night. The demands were minute and unpredictable. I was always on high alert, always waiting for the next request. Any lapse, no matter how minor, was met with disproportionate rage. Once, I missed a text message from her while driving a client to a retreat location. The phone was legally supposed to be tucked away. When I finally responded 10 minutes later, the repercussions were immediate. The next morning, she cornered me in the kitchen. 10 minutes. Margaret, 10 minutes of silence when a client is waiting for confirmation. Do you realize what that says about Solace Haven? It says we are amateur, disorganized, and unreliable. It says you are useless. She didn't stop there. I was forced to sit at the sleek office desk and draft a formal, excruciatingly detailed email of apology. The email wasn't for the client. It was addressed to Victoria herself, confessing my lack of service mindset and apologizing for tarnishing the Solace Haven brand. Writing those words, repeatedly admitting my incompetence, felt like scraping away tiny layers of my own soul. Victoria adored humiliating me in front of the other staff, the actual, paid employees who rotated in for massage or housekeeping shifts. She would narrate my minor mistakes like a funny, yet cautionary tale. "The girl here," she would begin, addressing a pair of therapists, gesturing toward me as I furiously organized essential oils. "She forgot to order the oat milk yesterday. Oat milk! You'd think an adult could handle a basic grocery list. But no, it just proves my theory. Young people today, they only want to complain about their student loans, but they don't want to put in the hard work. They lack grit." The employees would offer nervous, polite laughs, and I would just stand there, burning with shame, forced to maintain a placid, professional expression. She used my errors to solidify her image as the tough but fair boss, the one willing to call out the laziness of the younger generation. It made me a useful foil. The physical exhaustion was profound, but when my body would inevitably betray me, a slump of the shoulders, a sigh of pure fatigue, Victoria would instantly seize on it. "Look at you, Margaret," she'd say, her eyes glittering with contempt. "You look weak. You look tired after barely a month. If you can't handle this minimal pressure, how do you ever expect to make it in the real world? Do you think CEOs sleep in? Do you think success waits for the frail?" Slowly, insidiously, I began to believe her. Maybe I was weak. Maybe I was lazy. My own perception of myself, nurtured by a lifetime of being the helpful, smart girl, was being systematically dismantled by her constant narrative of my inadequacy. Weekends were the worst. When her high-paying guests arrived for retreats, I became a true ghost, My duties multiplied, running up and down the stairs with luggage, silently preparing and serving organic health smoothies, turning down rooms, arranging complicated spa itineraries. I was required to be constantly smiling, utterly invisible, and flawlessly efficient. Meanwhile, Victoria would be on the patio, performing for her guests and for her social media following. She'd post photos of the stunning Santa Fe sunsets and the peaceful family-like atmosphere of Solace Haven. Sometimes, I'd be in the blurred background, the girl carrying a tray, the girl folding towels. My mother and father, back in Ohio, would see these polished images. They'd see the luxurious settings, the subtle glimpse of my presence, and assume I was living the high life. Mom would text me, "So proud of you. Looks like you're having a wonderful time." Victoria is such a generous soul. And then, the obligatory kicker. "She called yesterday. She mentioned you seemed a bit slow lately. Don't get distracted. Mags, don't whine. Remember why you're there." Their messages were a constant reinforcement of Victoria's power. My own family saw my exhaustion as a moral failure, not a consequence of my labor. The message was clear. My comfort did not matter. Only the performance of the golden opportunity mattered. When I tried to call home, usually late at night, I could barely manage a few sentences about how overwhelming the work was before Mom would cut me off, her voice laced with panic. "Don't make a big deal out of this. Margaret, it's hard work. Yes, but you signed up for this. We cannot afford to have Victoria feel like she made a mistake taking you in. Don't embarrass me in front of the family again." I stopped calling. I stopped talking about the long hours. Every time I reached out for comfort or validation, I was met with shame and the demand for silence. I shrank into myself, learning to internalize the pain. My sleep schedule was utterly destroyed. My room didn't have a phone line, but my personal cell was always necessary to receive Victoria's late-night emails with demands for the morning. I would fall into a restless, shallow sleep, only to be jolted awake by the shrill ping of an incoming email. My heart would start pounding, the adrenaline spiking, instantly terrified that I had missed an important instruction, that I would be verbally annihilated in the morning. The fear of being scolded became a more potent motivator than the need for rest. Day after day, the process continued. The Margaret who had arrived in Santa Fe, the resilient, witty girl who loved to write and laugh and had a fierce desire to fix her family's debt, was being systematically ground down. I was molded into a hollow receptacle, a person whose only function was to say, "Yes, Victoria," and to anticipate the next task. I lost my internal spark, my dreams of going back to college, of becoming a writer, of having a life that was mine, all faded under the suffocating weight of my indebtedness and exhaustion. I became the perfect, compliant object of exploitation, convinced that my current misery was merely the price of a future I would never truly earn. The breaking point came late one evening, deep into the 6th month of my apprenticeship. It was nearly midnight. I had been awake and working since 5 o'clock that morning, preparing the villa for a high-value client, a famous tech executive who demanded absolute perfection. I was exhausted, fueled only by adrenaline and the grim knowledge that if I stopped, I would be publicly dismantled. I was meticulously clearing the last of the canapés from the terrace when I stumbled. The result was immediate and sickening, a loud, catastrophic smash, as one of Victoria's antique crystal wine glasses, a glass she often boasted cost nearly $1,000, shattered into a glittering spray across the polished stone floor. I froze, my breath hitched, waiting for the explosion. The tech executive and Victoria were seated nearby. Victoria's reaction, at first, was a masterclass in controlled performance. She rose slowly, her expression radiating serene empathy. "Oh, darling Margaret," she said, her voice dripping with compassion as she placed a comforting but firm hand on my shoulder. "It's just glass. It's absolutely nothing. Accidents happen when you've worked as hard as she has. Robert, she's been up since before dawn making sure your retreat is flawless." She made a show of patting my cheek. "Go to bed, sweetheart. I'll have Javier clean that up tomorrow." The executive, suitably impressed by her grace and generosity, smiled warmly. "What a truly wonderful boss you are, Victoria. And such a hard worker, your niece." I mumbled an apology and retreated, feeling sickened by the forced display. I had barely made it back to my little room when the applause stopped. Victoria followed me instantly. The moment the door to the storage room shut, the mask ripped off. "Get back in the kitchen," she commanded, her voice low and venomous, "and leave your phone here." She snatched my phone from my hand and placed it on the small shelf outside the door. Then, with a cold, terrifying click, she locked my door from the outside. "You will not go to bed. Margaret, you will spend the night on your knees, cleaning every shard of glass, every molecule of dust, from the kitchen, the staircase, and the living room. You will reflect on the cost of your carelessness and fatigue until I open this door in the morning." The locking of the door was the single most terrifying moment of my time there. It wasn't the task. I was used to hard labor, but the explicit, physical imprisonment. It felt like a fundamental boundary had been crossed. I spent the next 6 hours, from 1 o'clock in the morning until nearly 7 o'clock, scrubbing floors. My hands were red and stinging from the harsh cleaning chemicals. The work was mindless, agonizing, and designed purely to crush my spirit. As I scrubbed the last corner of the pristine living room, I looked at the floor, not with the exhaustion of a tired employee, but with the dawning, primal fear of a trapped person. I realized Victoria wasn't just my demanding relative. She was a genuine sociopath operating under a veneer of luxury. My deference and my gratitude were gone, replaced by a cold, clear instinct for survival. When Victoria finally unlocked the door the next morning, her hair still perfectly coiled, her eyes showing no trace of the night's cruelty, she acted as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. "Feeling rested, Margaret?" she asked, a smirk playing on her lips. "Good. Get breakfast ready." She handed back my phone, but before I could turn away, she delivered the final blow, a subtle, cold threat. "Just so we're clear, Margaret, this house is full of petty cash and expensive client gifts. If you ever feel tempted to invent stories about your stay here to your little family, I will regretfully have to inform them, and the authorities, that you were stealing cash from the client's travel funds. You understand? You make trouble for me. You become a thief." She had planted the seed of the counter-narrative. I was no longer just the lazy apprentice. I was now a potential criminal. Shaken, I did the one thing I was taught to do. I tried to tell my mother. I called her during my 10-minute break, my voice shaking. "Mom, things are not okay here. Victoria locked me in my room last night. I think I need to come home." Before I could say anything else, Mom interrupted me, her tone impatient and irritated. "Margaret, I literally just hung up with Victoria. She called to complain that you're being easily discouraged and too sensitive to criticism. Look, I know you're tired, but you're being dramatic. You cannot ruin this rare opportunity. You need to grow up and stop making trouble." Click, she hung up. I stood there, holding the dead phone, the last thread of hope that my family would save me snapping. They were not my allies. They were Victoria's enforcers. A few days later, while Victoria was out, I was sorting through a stack of invoices in her private office. I came across something unusual, a tax document and a strange set of payroll spreadsheets. The documents listed my full name, Margaret Fowler, under a section for contracted personnel. However, the figures next to my name for wages and working hours were substantial, far more than the paltry stipend I was receiving. It appeared Victoria was using my name to claim personnel expenses and tax deductions that did not correspond to any actual pay I received. She was using me as a ghost employee for financial gain. The realization was a jolt of electric clarity. This wasn't just mean-spirited family drama. This was fraud. This was the mechanism of my exploitation laid bare. Acting purely on instinct, fueled by the memory of the locked door. I pulled out my phone. I quickly took several pictures of the strange spreadsheets, the tax form with my name, and a few cryptic emails discussing off-the-books labor resources. I immediately sent the photos to a burner email account I hadn't used in years. I didn't know what I would do with them, but I knew I needed evidence. That night, as I was sweeping the back patio, the seasonal massage therapist, a young woman named Maya, pulled me aside. Maya was only there for a few days a week, and she'd often seen the way Victoria spoke to me. She lowered her voice to a whisper. "Hey, Mags, can I talk to you for a second?" I nodded, feeling my nerves tighten. "Look," Maya said, her eyes darting toward the villa's windows. "I don't know your whole story, but this isn't a normal internship. That woman works you like a dog for barely any money. I've worked at high-end spas before. This isn't mentorship. It's exploitation. You know there are places that have been sued for this exact kind of labor fraud, right?" Maya's words were the final drop in a cup that had been overflowing for months. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't too sensitive. My perception of the injustice was valid, and the system was recognized as illegal. The validation from a stranger was more powerful than any denial from my own blood. In that moment, scrubbing the patio floor under the weak glow of the security lights, I made a silent, unshakable vow. I would not be trapped forever in this sick model of benefactor and indebted servant. I realized that if I didn't plan my escape now, I would simply become another one of Victoria Hale's permanent, invisible fixtures. The key to escape wasn't speed. It was evidence. The moment Maya had spoken the word exploitation, my compliance shattered, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. Victoria wanted to play a high-stakes game? Fine, I would be the quietest spy she ever employed. I started systematizing everything. My phone became a critical tool, but I had to be excruciatingly careful. Every time Victoria left a strange email, an abnormal spreadsheet, or an exhausting work schedule lying open on her desk, I would snap a picture. I made sure to capture the timestamps and the dates. Crucially, I never accessed my burner email from the villa's Wi-Fi network. I would wait until I was driving to the grocery store or waiting in line at the dry cleaners, using cellular data in the parking lot to upload the photos to my reserve account. Each file was saved under a mundane, utterly innocent name, like recipe for Sunday or client contact list. My most important task was audio recording. I purchased a tiny voice recorder. Cheap, easy to conceal. During one of my supply runs, I'd activate it whenever I anticipated a high-pressure conversation. I specifically captured the instances where Victoria would demand work far outside my supposed trainee hours, or, more chillingly, when she'd issue her subtle threats about telling my family I was lazy if I tried to quit. I now had her own voice confirming the abusive power dynamic. During my meager 30-minute lunch breaks, which I often ate standing up behind the kitchen island, I wasn't reading novels or resting. I was enrolled in a free online crash course on basic U.S. labor law. I needed to understand what my rights were as a supposed apprentice and what protections existed against wage theft and misclassification. It was an intellectual act of self-defense, giving me the vocabulary to name the cage I was in. Life in the villa, meanwhile, was escalating from difficult to unbearable. Victoria landed a massive, high-profile retreat contract with a major tech company based in Austin, Texas. The workload instantly doubled. The concept of a day off vanished entirely. I was working 18-hour days, sometimes more, preparing complicated meal plans, managing logistics for 30 people, and handling all of Victoria's personal needs simultaneously. The pay, the measly stipend I was supposed to be receiving, was weeks late, and when it finally arrived, it was less than I expected. With no explanation, I knew I was ready for the next step. Using a public library computer, another detail I ensured was separate from Victoria's network, I gathered a selection of my documents, a few damning spreadsheets, the signed apprentice agreement, and several of the longer work schedules. I sent the materials anonymously to an online labor support hotline. The response came back within a day. If the data was authentic, the analysis confirmed what Maya had told me. I was the victim of severe labor exploitation and fraudulent record-keeping. The anonymous legal analyst confirmed that Victoria was systematically exploiting my family status to circumvent minimum wage and overtime laws. I knew I needed to leave, and I needed my family on board. One final time. I called my mother, Eleanor. "Mom, I have to come home now," I stated, skipping the details, sticking to the bottom line. "I'm exhausted. The work is nonstop, and I think Victoria is doing something illegal with my name." The line went silent for a beat. When Mom spoke, the warmth of the mother who used to read me bedtime stories was utterly gone, replaced by the chilling voice of a woman terrified of losing status. "You will absolutely not disappoint Victoria. Margaret, we are not having this discussion. She just told Carol how helpful you were with the Austin contract. Do not make me lose face with the family. Stay there. Finish your year. Be grateful." She hung up, the finality of the click severing the last fragile thread between us. The real knife twist came a few days later. I had kept the family group chat muted, but out of habit. I scrolled through. There, scattered among the usual banter, were messages that made my stomach drop. "Cousin Denise, I heard from Victoria that Mags is struggling with the rigor of the apprenticeship. Aunt Carol, she's lazy, always has been. She just loves playing the victim to get out of hard work. Mom, Eleanor, Victoria says she's afraid Margaret is inventing stories to try and get out of the arrangement. We are so embarrassed. We raised her better than this." Victoria had executed her preemptive strike. She had already framed me as the unstable, ungrateful, and lazy family member who was trying to bail on a golden opportunity. The flood of judgmental messages, the cold dismissal of my suffering, the instant belief in Victoria's narrative, it was a betrayal so profound it rearranged my understanding of my entire life. I finally understood the dynamic that had trapped me since I was a child. In their eyes, Victoria was the wealthy benefactor, the family's social asset, the generous millionaire. I was the indebted poor relation. If I accused Victoria of abuse, the betrayal wasn't hers, it was mine. I would be branded the traitor, the ungrateful child who bit the hand that fed her family's debt. Waiting for them to understand me was pointless. It was clear that my self-sacrifice was the currency that bought them respectability. If I came forward, I wouldn't just lose Victoria, I would lose my entire family network. The realization brought a strange, hard kind of peace. I was alone, but I was also free to act. I didn't have to worry about protecting their feelings or their social image anymore. I recognized that if I continued to operate within the constraints of the good daughter role, I would be sacrificed again and again. The only path forward was self-rescue, even if it meant facing down my entire family and burning every bridge they had built to that fake pedestal of success. The meticulous gathering of evidence shifted from a project of escape to a weapon of war. The immediate catalyst for my departure was a small, cruel gesture. I had secretly printed out a new version of my resume, focusing on the real work I was doing: content management, logistics coordination, rather than the vague title of trainee. I planned to apply for jobs the next day at a coffee shop. Victoria, with her terrifying instinct for surveillance, found the neatly folded paper hidden beneath my mattress. She didn't scream. She simply walked into the kitchen where I was prepping dinner, held the paper up between two fingers as if it were contaminated, and slowly, deliberately, ripped it down the center. Then she ripped the halves into quarters, letting the pieces flutter into the trash can. "You're going nowhere, Margaret," she said, her voice a low, chilling purr. "You are deeply indebted to me, to your family, and until I say you're done, you are my assistant. You will not betray my trust." That was it, the absolute denial of my future. The claim of ownership sealed my decision. I wasn't waiting for the year to end. I was leaving that night. My preparations were quiet, efficient, and fueled by 6 months of suppressed rage. I took only the essentials: a few changes of clothes, my small laptop, my driver's license, and my passport. My greatest treasures, the accumulated evidence, were secured. I transferred all the documents, the photos of the spreadsheets, and the audio recordings onto a minuscule USB drive. That drive I carefully slipped deep into the lining of my right shoe, stitching the sole back just enough so it was completely hidden. My phone was in my pocket. I left my meager stipend money in the room. I was not going to give her any legitimate claim of theft. Around 10 o'clock, I knew my window was open. Victoria had a strict evening routine that involved a 60-minute session in her private, humidity-controlled cedar sauna, a period of total, uninterrupted silence. I waited until I heard the faint hiss of the sauna steam kicking on. Moving on silent, stocking feet, I eased open the latch on the back utility door, the one I used for taking out trash and receiving deliveries. The cool, dry New Mexico air hit my face, shocking me into alertness. I didn't look back at the elegant, silent house. It was a beautiful tomb, and I was escaping. Out on the dusty driveway, hidden by the shadows of the tall cacti, I pulled out my phone. I had already set up the rideshare app under a different name and prepaid for the fare. A dark sedan pulled up 30 seconds later, its headlights off. I opened the door, slipped into the back seat, and whispered the address I had memorized. A cheap, anonymous motel near the city limits, miles away from the Solace Haven bubble. As the car pulled away, I glanced back only once at the villa, the white walls, the perfect landscaping. It was utterly silent, utterly deceptive, and I was out. The motel room was small, smelled faintly of disinfectant, and felt safer than any room I had occupied in half a year. I used the motel's public Wi-Fi, another firewall between me and Victoria, to contact the labor support center that had analyzed my files. They were ready for me. Within hours, they had connected me with an attorney named Jordan Alvarez, who specialized in employee misclassification and wage theft cases. Jordan's instructions were clear. We need to control the narrative immediately. He was right. By the next afternoon, my phone was exploding. Victoria was furious. She didn't text. She communicated through mass-produced rage. Victoria Hale, you have committed a serious offense. You have stolen proprietary client data and, I suspect, several $1,000s in cash from the front safe. I'm reporting this to the police. Return immediately and I will consider calling off the authorities. Victoria Hale, your family is already aware of your instability and your theft. Do not destroy your mother's reputation. You are a criminal. The threats were exactly what I had feared and anticipated. She was building her counter-narrative of the thief and the mentally unstable traitor. Instead of silence, I chose to speak. Following Jordan's advice to start slow and test the waters, I spent several hours crafting a long, detailed, anonymous post on a large career and workplace abuse forum. I detailed the experience, but left out all identifying names, calling Victoria the benefactress and Solace Haven the luxury retreat. I wrote about being lured across state lines with the promise of a golden opportunity, only to be forced into 16-hour shifts, denied fair pay, psychologically abused, and threatened with familial shaming and false accusations. The core theme: this is not mentorship, it is exploitation disguised as family help. I hit post, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. Within the hour, the post had dozens of comments. By the next morning, it had hundreds of shares across different platforms. People were seeing themselves in my story. My uncle did this to me at his restaurant. My cousin had me working for free at her real estate office. My story was a painful mirror, reflecting a common, ugly pattern of rich relatives using the concept of family to justify wage theft and abuse. Victoria didn't miss a beat. She saw the viral response and immediately launched her public defense on her own social media pages. She posted a serene photo of herself, with a caption full of sanctimonious pity. It is deeply painful when a loved one you have tried to mentor struggles with mental health and instability. We recently had a young family member, who we took in out of pure kindness, sadly run away in the night after fabricating wild stories and taking cash from the house. Please send prayers for her recovery and for the protection of our brand integrity. She never named me, but everyone in our circle knew. The fallout with my family was instant and brutal. My phone became a conduit for their anger and fear. My mother and Aunt Carol led the charge, flooding me with frantic, enraged texts and voice messages. "Mom, you are destroying us. Victoria has done everything for you. You are a liar and an ingrate. Take down that post." Aunt Carol, "How dare you try to smear your family's good name? You are embarrassing everyone. This is all about your jealousy of Victoria's success." The family had officially and overwhelmingly chosen sides. They believed Victoria's narrative of the unstable thief over my desperate plea for truth. The torrent of condemnation only solidified my isolation, but it also crystallized my purpose. I was utterly alone, but I was also undeniably right. Jordan Alvarez, my lawyer, saw the exchange of accusations. He called me immediately. "This is good, Margaret," he said, his voice clipped and serious. "She's now publicly accusing you of theft and making false statements about your mental state. That's defamation, and it gives us leverage. But an anonymous post is not enough. You need to come forward. We need to go the legal route if you want to truly escape her power and prevent her from doing this to anyone else, including your cousin Emma." I looked out the cheap motel window at the bright, indifferent New Mexico sun. The fight was no longer a silent struggle. It was now a public war. And the only way to win a public war was to step into the light. Jordan Alvarez was meticulous. He had the sharp, precise energy of a man who enjoyed pulling apart legal lies. We spent 2 grueling days in his small, windowless office, organizing the mountain of evidence I had smuggled out of Solace Haven. We laid out everything. The photos of the dense, relentless work schedules that proved a 17-hour workday was standard. The email chains where Victoria explicitly demanded non-compensated work. The chilling audio recordings where she used the threat of family disapproval to keep me quiet. And most crucially, the tax documents. Jordan zeroed in on the financial discrepancies. "Look at this. Margaret, the apprentice stipend you received was only about $200 a week, barely covering the bare minimum you sent home. But on her internal accounting and tax filings, Victoria listed you as a logistics coordinator with a salary that was nearly $40,000 a year." The numbers confirmed the fraud. Victoria had been using my name and social security number to claim a massive personnel deduction, effectively turning me into a tax shield, while paying me nothing near minimum wage. I was not an apprentice. I was an asset being manipulated for tax gain. "She got a significant tax break by having you live there and work for free, all while calling it family mentorship," Jordan stated, leaning back in his chair. "This is the classic misclassification case, but with an added layer of psychological coercion that we can prove through the audio." Jordan understood that we needed more than my word. We needed a choir. He drafted a careful, legally sound post that he published on several job boards and local employment forums, calling for former Solace Haven employees to contact his firm if they had experienced irregular payment structures or were pressured to sign waivers concerning overtime pay. He did not name Victoria, but the address and the company name were specific. The response was surprising. It wasn't a flood, but a steady, significant trickle. One of the first to respond was Maya. "I knew it," Maya texted me. "She tried to pull the same thing on me last year. She gave me a document saying I had voluntarily waived all rights to overtime because I was a self-employed contractor. I refused to sign it, and guess what? My hours got cut to 0 the next week. I'm happy to testify." Maya's confirmation was gold. It proved a pattern, not an isolated incident. Then came the bigger, darker twist. A package arrived anonymously at Jordan's office. It contained printed internal spreadsheets from Solace Haven's former payroll system. The sender was a former accountant, clearly terrified of being identified. The documents revealed Victoria's insidious defense strategy. In meetings with her financial advisors, whenever she was questioned about the unusually low labor costs or the high turnover rate, Victoria would point to my case. Her excuse, written in meeting notes, was chilling. "We have family members, like my niece Margaret, who happily work without pay for the mentorship. They set the tone. It helps keep our labor overhead low." She hadn't just used me for tax fraud. She had used the narrative of my family sacrifice as moral cover to justify the exploitation of her actual paid staff. I was the scapegoat, the shining example of the ungrateful young who should be satisfied with exposure instead of wages. With the legal case building, I turned back to my primary motivation: my family. I compiled a discreet, measured summary of the evidence, not the legal threats, but the concrete proof of the 16-hour workdays and the tax document showing the salary I never received. I emailed it to a handful of my more distant aunts and uncles, hoping to crack the monolithic wall of belief in Victoria. Most of them remained silent, clearly unwilling to challenge the family matriarch. But one unexpected message broke through. My Aunt Laura, Mom's sister, who lived 4 states away and worked as a nail technician, called me back immediately. "Margaret, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I saw you at that barbecue 2 years ago, right before you left. You looked absolutely skeletal. Working that hardware store job and waiting tables at night, I knew you were exhausted, but I didn't say anything. I was afraid of Mom. I was afraid of Victoria. I thought, someone will step in, but no one did. You have to go all the way. Mags, you have to fight for what's yours." Aunt Laura's tears were the first validation I'd received from a family member. I wasn't just fighting Victoria. I was fighting the family's deep-seated culture of silence and self-preservation. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. It was a cryptic text, sent late one night. "Grandma, are you safe?" I replied, "Yes, Grandma, I'm with a lawyer." Her response came back instantly, carrying the full weight of family history. "If you say this is the truth, then go all the way. This time, your grandmother stands with you." My grandmother, the oldest surviving member of the Fowler side, her support was a profound shock. She called me the next morning, her voice thin but firm. She told me a secret, one that had been buried in the family narrative for decades. "You think Victoria created this model? Mags, she didn't. When Victoria was your age, barely 20, she was the poor niece. She was sent to live with her own wealthy great-aunt, who ran a small real estate firm. Victoria worked for her for nearly 2 years, unpaid. She was the live-in maid and personal assistant, all disguised as an apprenticeship. When she finally left, she vowed she would never be poor or powerless again." My blood ran cold. "She learned the model. Margaret," Grandma continued, "she learned that family obligation is the perfect excuse for labor theft. She didn't rise up. She just repeated the cycle, only with a more expensive house and a nicer brand name. I wasn't just fighting Victoria. I was fighting a generational cycle of abuse wrapped in the pretty ribbon of success. Victoria wasn't the monster. She was a victim who had become the perpetrator. If I didn't stop this cycle now, Emma, or some other young, indebted relative, would inevitably be the next one lured into the Solace Haven trap. The fear was finally gone. It was replaced by a grim, fierce determination. I had the evidence, the legal counsel, and the moral certainty. I was ready to lose my entire family network. I turned to Jordan. "We file the suit. We file for back wages, for punitive damages, and we expose the tax fraud. I'm ready." I knew the cost. I would forever be branded the ungrateful, dramatic traitor in the Fowler family history, but I was finally ready to accept that label, because it was the only way to save my cousin and, ultimately, to save the 20-year-old girl I used to be. The legal battle began with the cold, official stamp of the court. Jordan formally filed the lawsuit against Victoria Hale and Solace Haven Retreats. The charges were comprehensive: misclassification of an employee, wage theft, tax fraud through fraudulent personnel claims, and the defamation and emotional distress caused by her public accusations of theft and instability. We also included a demand for significant punitive damages. Victoria's immediate reaction was a predictable explosion of indignation. Since the suit involved labor violations, the State Labor Department was immediately mandated to open an investigation and schedule an inspection of Solace Haven's records and premises. Victoria contacted me, not directly, but through her own team of high-powered, high-priced lawyers, who tried to argue that the entire suit was frivolous. Victoria's official defense, leaked through her staff's social media, was that the case was the work of a single disgruntled employee with severe personal issues who was lashing out after being lovingly dismissed. She maintained that I was never an employee, just a family member receiving subsidized housing and mentorship, a claim that crumbled under the weight of the 16-hour work logs. The final decisive betrayal came from the only people I had left to lose: my parents and my extended family. They organized an urgent family-only video call. I was, predictably, not invited. My crime was too great. I had dared to challenge the family's most successful member and had brought shame upon their name by involving the legal system. Fortunately, Aunt Laura, God bless her, made sure I wasn't left in the dark. She recorded the entire meeting and, with a silent text message, sent the audio file to me. I listened to it late that night in my tiny motel room, the audio filling the silence, chilling me to the core. They weren't discussing my safety. They weren't discussing the evidence I had sent. Their only topic was their own social standing. "We simply cannot stand by her," I heard Aunt Carol declare. "We have to show Victoria that we disown this ridiculous lawsuit. If Margaret dares to drag a family member into court, we will not support her." Then, my mother's voice cut in, sharp and laced with fear. "If she wins the suit, how do we ever look at anyone in the family again? Victoria gave us everything. She helped us stabilize our debt. Margaret needs to stop this for the sake of the family reputation. We raised her to be grateful, not to be a scandal." It wasn't a debate about right and wrong. It was a triage of reputation. My health, my stolen wages, my forced imprisonment, none of it mattered against the fear of losing face in front of their wealthy, successful cousin. The last sliver of hope that they might someday acknowledge their complicity was crushed. But this time, the pain didn't paralyze me. It clarified my vision. I was no longer fighting for their approval. I was fighting for the fundamental principle that family cannot be weaponized to justify illegal exploitation. My fight was now for Maya, for the silent accountant, and for the next generation of young people, Emma included, who might be lured by the same false promises. The first preliminary hearing date arrived 2 weeks later. I walked into the New Mexico courthouse, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. I was wearing a simple, dark blue pantsuit, a small, tangible act of independence that Grandma had helped me buy with money she'd saved from her Social Security checks. In my arms, I held a thick, heavy binder containing every single piece of evidence, a testament to 6 months of quiet terror. Victoria was already there, flanked by a phalanx of 3 sharply dressed defense attorneys. She wore a tailored cream designer suit and looked utterly untouchable, her perfect hair and expensive perfume a grotesque display of wealth next to my humble attire. She didn't look at me. She looked through me, like a piece of faulty machinery she intended to have scrapped. Before the judge even called us in, Victoria, on her lawyer's advice, approached me in the hallway. Her face, usually so composed, held a flicker of forced sincerity. "Margaret, darling," she cooed, low enough that her lawyers couldn't hear. "Let's be sensible. This doesn't have to get ugly. I'm willing to be generous. I will write you a check today for $20,000. That's enough to pay off your parents' debt and get you started back in Ohio. All you have to do is sign this non-disclosure agreement, delete that absurd social media post, and admit that this was just a misunderstanding driven by your emotional exhaustion." $20,000. It was an astronomical sum to me, enough to genuinely lift my parents out of immediate crisis. The pressure of their debt, the thought of instant financial relief, hit me like a physical blow. The temptation to take the money and just disappear was immense. I felt myself swaying. The fear of losing the case and being buried in legal fees battling the sudden promise of a clean escape. I needed clarity. I needed the voice of someone who saw beyond the money. I excused myself, walking quickly down the sterile, echoing hallway, and called the one person whose moral compass I still trusted. "Grandma," I whispered, fighting back tears. "She's offering me $20,000 to sign an NDA and go away. I can clear Mom and Dad's debt." I expected her to tell me to take the money, but she didn't. Her voice, coming through the tinny phone speaker, was the voice of cold, enduring wisdom. Margaret, I know that $20,000 looks like the world to you right now, but remember what I told you. Victoria learned this from someone else. If you take that money and you go silent, you sign the permission slip. You guarantee that there will be many more young people sent to her house, many more little cousins who will be mentored and taught just like you were. Your silence is her license. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Do you want to stop the cycle? Or just get paid to look the other way? I hung up, my heart firming into a solid, unyielding stone in my chest. I walked back to where Victoria waited, her hands clasped patiently in front of her. I met her eyes, for the first time, not with deference or fear, but with an equalizing, calm gaze. Thank you for the offer. Victoria, I said clearly, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. But I don't need money to be silent. What I need is for the truth to be officially recorded and made impossible to erase. The veneer of Victoria's composure finally cracked. For a brief, startling moment, a look of naked, calculating fear flashed across her face. The fear of a powerful predator realizing her prey was fighting back with intelligence. That single, fleeting expression was my first true victory. She knew then that the good kid, who was supposed to roll over, had become her biggest threat. The final hearing felt less like a courtroom proceeding and more like an exorcism. It was the culmination of 9 years of silent injustice, focused into one sterile, tense room. Jordan Alvarez was brilliant. He didn't just present documents, he wove a narrative, starting with my arrival as the grateful niece sent by a desperate family, and moving inexorably toward my 6 months of non-compensated servitude and subsequent escape and defamation. The evidence was laid out like surgical tools. First, the systemic abuse, the internal email threads demanding work outside of normal hours, due to family commitment, the payroll stubs showing the meager weekly allowance versus the actual volume of labor, and the thick, meticulously maintained schedule detailing my continuous 7-day work week. Then came the psychological trauma. Jordan played the audio recording where Victoria, in her low, menacing voice, threatened to tell my parents I was unstable if I ever tried to quit. The sound of her voice, so cold and cruel, elicited gasps from the small gallery. Witnesses followed, painting a consistent, damning picture. Maya, the seasonal therapist, testified confidently about Victoria's attempts to use contractor waivers to avoid paying overtime, and how my situation was used as an example to keep other employees quiet. The former accountant, sitting behind a screen to protect his anonymity, confirmed the worst. He detailed how Victoria had used my full legal name in tax filings to claim massive, fraudulent personnel deductions, effectively turning a vulnerable family member into a 6-figure tax loophole. The atmosphere thickened when my Aunt Laura took the stand. She was visibly shaking, but her voice was clear. She admitted to seeing the signs of my exhaustion and Victoria's controlling behavior, but confessed to silence. I was afraid of being cut off from the family wealth, she admitted, her eyes welling up. I saw Margaret being treated with contempt, being worked to the bone, and I did nothing because I didn't want to lose face with the successful side of the family. Her testimony was a powerful indictment of the entire Fowler-Hale culture. But the most devastating testimony came from my grandmother. She was frail but sat erect in her wheelchair, her presence commanding attention. Calmly, methodically, she recounted the secret family history, how Victoria herself had been the poor, dispatched niece years ago, victimized by the exact same model. Victoria did not break the chain of abuse, Grandma stated, looking directly at the judge, her voice carrying the solemn weight of history. She became the new master of it. She took what was done to her and passed it down to the next generation, hiding it behind the beautiful name of Solace Haven and the concept of family love. Victoria's high-priced legal team tried desperately to paint me as an ungrateful, failed young person consumed by jealousy of my cousin's success. They argued that my exhaustion was a pre-existing mental health issue, but the cold, hard numbers, the tax documents, the Labor Department's damning inspection reports of the Solace Haven premises, and the cross-referenced payroll sheets all pointed to irrefutable statutory violations. Then, Jordan delivered the final, breathtaking twist. He presented a recently leaked internal email Victoria had sent to her Austin business partner, dating back to the time of the major retreat contract. The email had been retrieved from the anonymous accountant's files. He read the crucial line aloud. "My niece is handling the logistics without salary, which is allowing us to report a net profit margin that is double the industry standard. It's a beautifully cost-effective solution." Victoria's own boast, written in her own words, became the perfect self-incrimination. It proved beyond a doubt that the non-payment was not mentorship, but a calculated business strategy to maximize profit, hiding behind a facade of family obligation. After a short recess, the judge returned with the verdict. The ruling was swift and conclusive. The court found Victoria Hale and Solace Haven Retreats liable for employee misclassification, systemic wage theft, and defamation against Margaret Fowler. The judgment was staggering. Victoria was ordered to pay me back wages for every single hour I had worked over those 6 months, calculated at full minimum wage plus mandatory overtime, plus significant punitive damages for the psychological distress and the attempt to ruin my reputation. It amounted to a substantial settlement that would not only clear my parents' debt, but leave me with enough capital to finally start my education again, debt-free. Beyond the money, the judge issued a permanent injunction. Victoria was ordered to submit to strict long-term business and payroll monitoring by the state. She was also required to publicly post a formal statement of correction on all platforms she had used to malign me, confirming that Margaret Fowler did not steal any cash, did not suffer from mental instability, and that all her previous accusations were false and retracted. The world seemed to spin into slow motion. As the judge's gavel slammed down, the crowd erupted. Victoria's face, moments before perfectly composed, crumpled into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock and fury. The makeup couldn't hide the deep, bitter defeat in her eyes as her lawyers quickly surrounded her. I stood there, leaning slightly on Jordan's arm, watching as Victoria, the powerful, untouchable, self-made guru, was escorted out of the courtroom, forced to face a gauntlet of flashing cameras and shouting reporters. Outside, the New Mexico sun was blinding, but I didn't squint. Grandma was waiting for me. She reached out from her wheelchair, her small, wrinkled hand finding mine. "You did it, Mags," she whispered, her voice full of pride. "You broke the cycle." As I looked at the future spread out before me, the possibility of college, of a real life, of starting over, I felt the release of 9 years of tension, every day of being psychologically beaten, every minute of those 16-hour shifts had finally concluded. The price had been paid, but for the first time, the one paying the price was no longer me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, hit that like button, and press the hype button to help this story reach more people who need to hear it.